The room was quiet except for the soft rustle of music sheets. A young pianist sat on the worn wooden bench, their fingers lightly brushing the keys of an old piano. The instrument had seen better days, its surface scratched and faded, but it still held a kind of magic that no modern piano could match. Every note played seemed to float in the air, carrying a gentle warmth that made anyone listening feel calm. Neighbors often wondered why someone so young could play with such depth and feeling, but they never questioned it aloud. Music had always been a refuge, a place where the world's harsh edges softened. From an early age, the pianist had been different. Where other children spent hours running and shouting outside, they spent their time sitting by the piano, watching fingers move over keys and listening to every tone with a sharp, almost painful attentiveness. Their parents noticed the intensity, the way music became more than just sound. It became a way to understand feelings they couldn't yet name. Sometimes it made them smile, sometimes it brought tears, and sometimes it left them so still that it felt as if time itself had stopped. Life in the small town was simple. Streets were lined with small shops and houses with gardens that bloomed in bursts of color every spring. The piano sat in a modest living room, where sunlight poured in through lace curtains in the morning. It was a quiet existence, and it suited the pianist. Yet, beneath the calm surface, there was a depth that few understood. The gentle melodies that flowed from the piano carried whispers of memories, shadows of emotions, and sometimes, hints of a sorrow that had been tucked away, unspoken. Today was special. The pianist had been invited to perform at a local recital, a small gathering of townspeople who appreciated music but rarely experienced anything beyond casual tunes. The young musician was nervous, a feeling that clung tightly to their chest, but it was mixed with a sense of purpose. This wasn't just another performance. This time, they would play a composition unlike anything heard before, something that had grown quietly in their mind for months. It was gentle yet powerful in a way that no applause could capture. The piece was personal, a secret story woven into every chord, and only they knew the truth behind it. As the sun began to set, casting a soft golden glow across the town, the pianist practiced one last time. Fingers glided over the keys with care, each note deliberate and filled with intention. There was a rhythm not just in the music, but in the heartbeat of the performer, in the subtle movements of breath and in the pause before the next chord. The piece was alive, not just a sequence of sounds but a living thing that demanded attention and respect. Each tone told a fragment of a story, each silence held a weight that words could not carry. Family members gathered nearby, offering quiet encouragement. A parent adjusted a chair, a sibling lingered by the doorway, both of them aware of the significance of the moment. There was pride, certainly, but also a quiet tension, an understanding that the pianist was about to reveal a part of themselves that no one had yet seen. Music had always been their voice, and tonight, it would speak louder than anything spoken in words. The recital hall was small, almost intimate. Wooden benches lined the room, polished smooth by years of use, and the stage was a modest platform, enough for a single performer and their piano. The audience arrived slowly, filling the space with whispers and soft shuffles. Neighbors, friends, and a few curious strangers settled in, some carrying programs, others simply eager to hear the young pianist play. The air was thick with anticipation, a gentle tension that made every creak of the floorboards sound louder. When it was finally time, the pianist took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The lights were warm, not harsh, and they illuminated the piano, casting a soft glow over the polished keys. Sitting down, the pianist allowed their fingers to hover for a moment, feeling the texture of the ivory and wood, recalling hours of practice and countless evenings spent alone in the same room. There was a small nod to themselves, a silent promise to pour everything into this performance. The first notes sounded delicate and soft, like the first drops of rain on a quiet afternoon. The melody was gentle, almost fragile, yet it carried an unmistakable presence. The audience leaned forward, drawn in by the purity of the sound. There was no hurry, no rush, only the slow, flowing motion of music that seemed to stretch time. People closed their eyes, some out of habit, some to better feel the music, and some simply to let it wash over them. In that moment, the room was united by a single thread, a quiet connection that only music could create. As the composition unfolded, it revealed layers of emotion. There were moments of lightness, where the melody danced and floated, and moments of depth, where the notes sank low, resonating in the chest of anyone listening. The pianist's hands moved with precision and feeling, each motion intentional, each pause weighted with meaning. It was clear that this was not just a piece of music, but a story being told without words, a story that invited listeners to interpret and feel according to their own hearts. The audience was captivated, unaware of the hours, the sacrifices, and the quiet struggles that had brought the pianist to this moment. They were unaware of the private battles, the moments of doubt, and the late nights when music was the only companion. Yet, as the final notes lingered in the air, a silence fell, heavy and profound. The gentle composition had left its mark, touching hearts and awakening emotions that had long been buried. People sat still, not wanting to break the spell, not wanting to disturb the delicate balance that had been created. Behind the piano, the young musician felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. Relief that the piece had been played as intended, anticipation for the moment when the truth behind it would be understood. The music had been the first step, a way to open a door that few had ever approached. Now all that remained was for the story, hidden within the gentle notes, to reveal itself. And in that quiet, shared space, there was a sense that something extraordinary was about to happen, something that would leave an impression long after the final applause faded. The pianist took a steady breath and let their hands glide over the keys, beginning the composition once more, this time in front of the audience. The opening notes were soft and deliberate, each one hanging in the air, like tiny drops of water creating ripples across a quiet pond. People leaned forward in their seats, drawn by the gentle sound, as though they were being pulled into a world that existed only in those moments of music. There was a stillness in the room that felt almost sacred. No one whispered, no one shifted restlessly. Everyone was held by the fragile thread of sound. As the music unfolded, its gentle simplicity began to reveal hidden layers. At first, it seemed like a lullaby, soft and soothing. But then subtle changes in tempo and harmony created an emotional depth that surprised listeners. The melody moved like a story, sometimes playful and light, at other times somber and reflective. It felt alive, as if it were breathing along with the pianist. Some audience members closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others stared at the performer, captivated by the emotion flowing from every note. The pianist had spent months crafting this piece, not only as a display of skill but as a vessel for personal truth. Every chord, every pause had meaning. It was more than just a performance. It was a confession, a silent telling of experiences that had shaped a life. The gentle quality of the composition was deliberate. It invited listeners to lean in, to listen closely, and to feel, even if they could not yet understand the full story. There was a quiet intensity in the pianist's movements, a focused delicacy that made the piece feel almost fragile, yet impossibly strong at the same time. People began to notice small details. The way a note lingered just a moment longer than expected, the tiny hesitations that punctuated certain chords, the sudden shifts that made the melody rise and fall like waves. It was as if the pianist had embedded a personal diary into the music itself, leaving hints of joy, sorrow, and secrets in every measure. The audience was drawn in, sensing that this was no ordinary piece of music. They could feel that there was something hidden beneath the surface, something that had shaped every decision, every movement of the hands on the piano. A few observers exchanged quiet glances, sensing the depth of the story that the music hinted at. A mother held her child closer, as if to protect them from emotions they couldn't yet name. An elderly man's eyes glistened with unshed tears, memories he hadn't spoken aloud resurfacing with each note. Others simply listened, feeling the weight of emotion without fully understanding why. The gentle composition had a power that words could not convey, a way of reaching into hearts and touching places that often remained silent. As the piece progressed, the pianist allowed themselves to be carried by it. Their movements became more fluid, more expressive, as if the music had taken control, guiding them through its hidden narrative. There were moments of delicate lightness, notes fluttering like birds in a soft breeze, and moments of depth, chords that sank low and resonated with a sense of longing. Every listener felt something different, yet all were united by the same invisible thread of feeling. The room itself seemed to breathe with the music, expanding and contracting with the rise and fall of the melody. The pianist's fingers traced arcs of emotion, sometimes gentle and slow, other times urgent and insistent. There was a rhythm in the pauses, a language in the silence that spoke as loudly as the notes themselves. It was in these moments of quiet that the composition revealed its deepest truths, whispering to those who would listen, hinting at the story that had yet to be told. Some leaned closer to the piano, as if they could catch the meaning more clearly, while others simply sat back, letting the music wash over them without needing to understand every detail. The audience began to sense that the piece was not only beautiful but deeply personal. There was a vulnerability in the pianist's playing, a quiet courage that resonated in the room. People often marvel at technical skill or dramatic performances, but this was different. It was honesty in sound, emotion made tangible through music. There was no need for words. The music itself was enough. The gentle composition became a bridge, connecting the pianist to everyone listening, allowing them to share a feeling that was universal yet intimately individual. A few audience members noticed tiny repetitions, subtle phrases that returned throughout the piece. They carried a haunting familiarity, as if they were echoing a memory or a secret known only to the pianist. Each time the phrase reappeared, it seemed to deepen the story, to draw the listener further into the experience. There was a sense that the music was alive, evolving with every note, responding to the room, to the hearts of those listening. Some could feel tears rising, some could feel a soft smile forming, and some simply sat in awe, unable to move or speak. By the middle of the composition, the pianist had allowed themselves to fully immerse in the music. Eyes closed, body relaxed yet attentive. They let the melody carry them through unseen landscapes of feeling. There were moments of quiet joy, where the music danced lightly, almost playfully, and moments of profound sorrow, where the sound seemed to bend under its own weight. The transitions were seamless, flowing naturally, making the story behind the piece feel organic and inevitable. Every note was purposeful, every silence intentional. In the audience, some began to whisper softly, though not to disturb the performance. They commented on the beauty, the subtle power, the way the piece seemed to reach inside them. Others were silent, entirely absorbed, their expressions reflecting the emotions being evoked. There was a collective awareness that this performance was unlike anything they had experienced before. The gentle composition had a way of speaking directly to the heart, bypassing logic, memory, and expectation. It was music as pure emotion, music as truth. The pianist continued, weaving contrasts of light and shadow into the melody. High notes sparkled like sunlight on water, and low notes resonated with a weight that seemed to pull on the listener's chest. The combination of delicacy and depth created an almost cinematic quality, a story unfolding without images or words. The music was at once personal and universal, a language that everyone could understand but that revealed different meanings to each individual. Some felt sorrow, some felt hope, some felt both at once, a complicated mixture that left them silent and reflective. As the composition neared its conclusion, there was a sense of anticipation in the room. People leaned forward, some holding their breath, as if aware that the final moments would carry a significance beyond the notes themselves. The pianist's hands moved with careful intention, drawing out the final phrases with a gentle insistence, each one placed with care. There was a pause, a moment of silence, and then the last notes rang out, soft and fading, lingering in the air like a memory that refuses to be forgotten. The audience remained still, processing what they had just experienced. Some blinked rapidly, as if trying to hold back tears. Others simply exhaled slowly, letting the emotions settle. There were no immediate words, no sudden applause. The room was filled with a quiet reverence, a shared understanding that something rare and meaningful had just been witnessed. The gentle piano composition had touched something deep in everyone, leaving an impression that went beyond music, reaching into the soul. The pianist opened their eyes slowly, meeting the gaze of those around them. There was a quiet connection, an unspoken acknowledgement that the music had succeeded in conveying its truth. A few tentative smiles appeared in the audience, some nods of recognition, and still, a few remained silent, processing the depth of emotion they had just felt. The performer felt a mixture of relief and anticipation, knowing that the first part of the story had been told through sound, but the truth behind the composition was still waiting to be revealed. As the applause began, gentle at first and then swelling, the pianist allowed themselves a small, private smile. They had shared a piece of themselves, a fragment of a larger story, and the audience had responded with attention, understanding, and emotion. Yet beneath the gentle melodies and the soft notes, the real story had not yet emerged. It was a secret hidden in plain sight, a truth waiting for the right moment to be revealed. And in that moment, as hands rested lightly on the keys and hearts in the room beat quietly in unison, there was a sense of anticipation, a feeling that what came next would leave everyone forever changed. After the final notes of the composition faded, the room was silent for a few moments, as if the audience collectively held their breath. Then a gentle murmur began, soft words exchanged between neighbors and friends, voices filled with awe and curiosity. Everyone seemed to feel the weight of the music, but no one fully understood its depth. The pianist remained at the bench, hands resting lightly on the keys, sensing that the real story was about to emerge. There was a tension in the air, not unpleasant, but charged with expectation. Something had been revealed, yet something more waited beneath the surface. A middle-aged man in the front row, who had attended the recital on a whim, leaned closer to the pianist and asked a quiet question about a recurring phrase in the composition. It was subtle, barely noticeable to anyone else, but it caught his attention. There was something unusual about the way that phrase returned throughout the piece, a lingering note that seemed almost like a message. The pianist's eyes met his briefly, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. The man realized that the music was more than melody. It was a map, a guide to a hidden truth that the pianist had carried for years. The audience remained largely unaware, still caught in the gentle afterglow of the performance. Some were talking in hushed tones about how beautiful the piece had been, while others sat quietly, reflecting on the emotions that had surfaced. But the pianist knew that a discovery had begun, that someone had sensed the hidden layers woven into the music. Every note had been intentional, every pause measured, and now the first ripple of recognition was appearing. The music had started as a personal expression, but it was evolving into something more, touching lives in ways that even the pianist had not anticipated. Backstage, a few family members exchanged glances. They had always known there was more to the music, that the compositions carried fragments of memories and experiences that the world would never hear in ordinary conversation. Now, seeing the audience react, they understood that the piece had reached deeper than anyone could have imagined. The quiet intensity of the performance had opened a door, inviting listeners to look closer, to pay attention, to feel the underlying story without knowing it fully. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man in the audience, who had been observing carefully, began to piece together small clues. Certain patterns in the music, repeated motifs, and subtle changes in tempo seemed to point toward a narrative, a series of events that had influenced the pianist's life profoundly. He felt a chill run down his spine, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, as if he had stumbled upon a secret that was never meant to be shared openly. But the music itself seemed to beckon, urging him to understand, to look beyond the surface and uncover the hidden truth. Across the room, a few younger listeners whispered quietly among themselves, noticing unusual harmonies and minor chords that felt like expressions of sorrow or regret. They compared what they heard with what they had felt in their own lives, sensing a universality in the emotion. There was no doubt that the piece carried an authenticity that went beyond skill or technique. It was lived experience translated into music. Every person who listened could feel it, even if they couldn't fully articulate what they were sensing. The pianist, aware of these subtle reactions, allowed themselves a quiet smile. They had hoped the composition would be understood on a surface level, that the beauty and emotion would be appreciated. But the fact that some were beginning to perceive the hidden story was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. The gentle piece had become a vessel, not just for sound, but for revelation. The truth was waiting, carefully concealed, and now the first seeds of awareness were taking root. After a few minutes, the middle-aged man approached the pianist after the applause had subsided. His steps were tentative, almost hesitant, as though he feared disturbing the delicate atmosphere. When he finally reached the performer, he whispered a single question about a phrase in the composition. It was specific, precise, and carried the weight of someone who had truly listened. The pianist nodded slightly, acknowledging the question without speaking. In that moment, the understanding was mutual. The music held a story, a truth, and it was time for it to be revealed. The audience began to disperse slowly, but some lingered, drawn by an unspoken curiosity. A few people returned to their seats, trying to catch the feeling that the music had evoked, wanting to connect the emotional dots that had formed in the last half hour. Others spoke quietly with friends and family, comparing interpretations and sharing impressions. They sensed that the composition had more to it than they had first realized. While the melody had been gentle, the resonance of the story beneath it was powerful, lingering like a shadow in the heart. The pianist retreated to a quiet corner of the hall, sitting on a bench near the back, reflecting on what had just happened. Playing the piece had been an act of courage, a way to express feelings that had long been unspoken. But now, seeing even a hint of understanding in the audience, the realization dawned that the next step would be to reveal the truth that had inspired the music. This truth was personal and raw, something that had shaped years of life in ways the world could not guess. Yet, the music had prepared the ground, softening the hearts of those who listened, making them ready to witness the story behind the notes. A few moments later, the middle-aged man returned, holding the music sheet gently in his hands. He had studied it carefully, noticing every nuance, every mark that suggested intention beyond simple performance instructions. He approached the pianist with respect, aware that he was touching something deeply personal. He asked if the piece was inspired by a real experience. The pianist hesitated briefly, feeling the weight of the moment, and then nodded. The air seemed to thicken with anticipation. Everyone who had sensed the depth of the composition was about to learn that it carried a truth far more profound than anyone had imagined. The pianist began to recount a story, one that had been hidden for years, a memory tucked away and expressed only through music. They spoke softly, so that only a few could hear at first, describing events that had shaped their life in ways both painful and defining. The audience who had lingered leaned closer, catching fragments of words that revealed heartbreak, courage, and resilience. The music had hinted at this story, but hearing it spoken aloud added a new dimension. The gentle composition, once purely melodic, now carried a narrative that explained the emotion everyone had felt but could not articulate. The story was raw and human, not dramatic for spectacle, but poignant in its honesty. It involved loss, moments of fear, and the quiet strength it took to continue living and creating despite adversity. The audience was silent, absorbing each word, connecting it with the emotions that had arisen during the performance. Some were moved to tears, others to quiet reflection, and all were aware that they were witnessing a profound moment of truth and vulnerability. The pianist's voice trembled at times, but they continued, understanding that the music had been the first step in sharing this truth. Each note had been carefully chosen to mirror moments in the story, to evoke the emotions without revealing the facts. Now, the hidden context was being illuminated, giving depth and clarity to the gentle melody. The audience's reactions shifted from admiration of skill to deep empathy, as they realized that the music had been a bridge, connecting personal experience with shared human emotion. By the end of the explanation, the room felt heavy with understanding and respect. People were moved in ways they had not anticipated, grateful for the honesty and courage it had taken to share the story. The gentle piano composition was no longer just a performance. It was a revelation, a testament to resilience and the transformative power of art. The The pianist sat quietly, letting the silence and reflection settle, aware that the hidden truth had finally been shared. The music had led the way, and now the story behind it had left everyone in the room changed, touched, and profoundly affected. The room had grown quiet, almost heavy with the weight of what had just been shared. The audience, now fully attentive, waited as the pianist began to speak in more detail about the story that had inspired the composition. Each word was measured, deliberate, yet carried the raw honesty of lived experience. They described the struggles, the moments of fear, the times when hope seemed impossible to find. The gentle composition had been a refuge during those moments, a way to express emotions that could not be spoken aloud. The story unfolded slowly, like turning the pages of a delicate diary. The pianist spoke of a personal loss that had left a lasting mark, a moment when the world seemed to shift and the familiar became uncertain. They described the fear and confusion, the long nights spent wrestling with emotions that seemed too vast for words. Music had become the only way to make sense of it, the only language that could carry the weight of sorrow without breaking under it. Each note of the composition reflected a part of that journey, a memory transformed into sound. As the audience listened, they began to connect the dots between the music and the story. The soft, lingering notes represented quiet moments of reflection. The sudden shifts in tempo mirrored bursts of emotion, and the delicate harmonies captured fleeting moments of hope. People could see, almost physically, how the music had been shaped by personal experience. Some leaned forward, trying to absorb every detail, while others closed their eyes, letting the emotions wash over them without interruption. The story and the music had merged into a single, living narrative. The pianist spoke of moments that had tested their courage, times when the weight of reality seemed too much to bear. They shared how music had been both a companion and a guide, offering comfort when words failed. The audience could feel the intensity of those moments, as if the music itself had carried the pain and the hope into the room. Tears formed quietly in the eyes of some listeners, while others simply held their breath, overwhelmed by the honesty and vulnerability that was being shared. There were also moments of light within the story, small victories and unexpected joys that had provided balance and perspective. The pianist described times when a kind word or a gentle gesture had made all the difference, when a moment of understanding had lifted the heaviness and allowed a sense of peace to return. The music reflected these moments as well, with gentle rises in melody and soft, uplifting chords that brought relief and warmth. It became clear that the composition was not only about sorrow but also about resilience, about finding light even in the darkest times. Audience members began to feel a connection not just to the music, but to the person behind it. The story was universal in its emotions, even if the events were unique. People recognized their own struggles, their own moments of fear and hope, reflected in the pianist's journey. The gentle piano composition had served as a bridge, linking private experience to shared understanding. The audience felt a profound respect for the courage it had taken to transform such personal experiences into art. As the pianist continued, the narrative deepened, revealing details of how life had changed after those pivotal moments. They spoke of learning to trust again, of discovering new sources of strength, and of embracing creativity as a way to heal. The composition had been written during this time of transformation, each note a testament to perseverance and the human capacity to endure and find meaning. The audience could sense the authenticity in every phrase, every chord, and the story became a living presence in the room, felt as much as it was heard. People began to whisper softly among themselves, sharing observations and emotions. They spoke of how the music and the story together created an experience that was both intimate and expansive. Some recognized familiar feelings in the narrative, while others were moved by the courage to confront and share such personal truths. The pianist's story had opened a window into a private world, yet it was accessible to anyone who listened, creating a powerful bond between performer and audience. The room seemed to breathe with the story, each person carrying a part of it in their own heart. The gentle composition had prepared them, softening the edges and allowing emotions to surface naturally. Now, with the truth fully revealed, the audience could appreciate the depth of what they had experienced. The music had been the key, the medium through which the pianist had communicated a lifetime of feelings, but the story added context, giving clarity and dimension to every note. There were moments when the pianist paused, letting the weight of certain memories sink in, allowing the audience to absorb the significance. The pauses were deliberate, reflective, giving space for emotion and understanding. Some listeners wiped tears quietly, others sat in stunned silence, and a few simply held their hands together, feeling gratitude for the honesty and openness they had been invited to witness. It was an experience that went beyond entertainment, reaching into the deepest aspects of empathy and human connection. The pianist's voice occasionally trembled, a reminder that even in sharing, vulnerability remained. Yet, the courage to continue speaking, to continue performing, carried its own power. The audience recognized this, and a collective sense of respect filled the room. They understood that the story behind the gentle composition was not easy to tell, yet it had been offered fully and without pretense. In that offering, they found inspiration, a reminder of the strength it takes to confront life's challenges and transform them into something meaningful. As the story drew to a close, the pianist reflected on the journey that had led to this moment. The composition had been a companion through difficult times, a mirror of emotions, and now it had become a bridge to others. The audience, fully engaged and deeply moved, responded with soft applause at first, which grew gradually as the weight of the story settled in. It was not just praise for technical skill, but for honesty, resilience, and the courage to share personal truth. The gentle piano composition, paired with the full story, had created an experience that left a lasting impression. People began to leave the hall slowly, speaking in hushed tones, carrying the emotions with them. Some felt a renewed sense of empathy, others felt gratitude for the reminder of human resilience. The pianist stayed behind, quietly gathering the music sheets, observing the reactions, and feeling the profound impact of having shared such an intimate part of life. The truth had been revealed, and in doing so, the music and the story had touched hearts and left everyone changed in subtle, lasting ways. Even as the hall emptied, there was a sense of lingering presence. The gentle notes, the emotions, the story, they remained in the minds of those who had listened. It was a reminder that music could be more than sound, that a composition could carry the weight of human experience, and that sharing personal truth could create connections that words alone could never achieve. The pianist, seated quietly by the piano, felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the journey of honesty, courage, and expression had reached those who were ready to receive it. The truth behind the gentle piano composition had finally unfolded, leaving everyone in the room profoundly affected and deeply moved. After the story behind the gentle piano composition had been fully shared, the atmosphere in the hall was different. People moved slowly, as if reluctant to leave the emotional space created by the performance and the revelation. There was a sense of quiet reflection, of lives briefly intertwined through shared experience. Each person carried a piece of the story, a fragment of emotion that would remain with them long after the final notes had faded. The pianist remained near the piano, letting the room empty slowly. There was no rush, no need to speak immediately. They observed faces, noticing the lingering expressions of awe, contemplation, and gentle smiles that had softened the tension of earlier moments. The experience had been more than a performance. It had been a moment of human connection, where music and truth had combined to touch hearts. The quiet applause still echoed softly in memory, a reminder that what had been shared was meaningful and genuine. As neighbors and friends drifted toward the exit, many paused to speak briefly with the pianist. Words were few but sincere. A woman whispered that she had felt the story in her bones. Another commented on the courage it took to turn personal pain into music. And a young listener admitted it was the first time they truly understood how music could express feelings words could not. Each exchange, though small, reinforced the bond created by the composition and its story. It was a shared acknowledgement that art, at its best, could communicate deep truths in subtle yet profound ways. Outside the hall, the air was cool and clear. People lingered on the steps and along the sidewalk, talking quietly with neighbors or simply reflecting in solitude. The night was calm, and the gentle composition, though no longer audible, remained alive in their minds. Some replayed fragments of the music, noticing details they had missed, understanding nuances they hadn't recognized before. The story had opened doors to empathy, allowing people to see the pianist not just as a performer, but as someone who had lived through experiences that could resonate with anyone willing to listen. The pianist walked slowly behind the hall, their fingers brushing lightly over the top of the piano lid as they moved. Each step was measured, reflective, as though processing the weight of the evening themselves. Sharing the story had been an act of courage, but it had also been liberating. The music had served as a bridge, first to convey emotion, then to reveal truth. Now that the story was understood, there was a sense of release, a quiet joy in knowing that vulnerability had created a lasting impact. The audience's reaction had exceeded expectation, showing a depth of understanding and compassion that was deeply gratifying. Among the audience, a few lingered in clusters, discussing not just the music, but the honesty behind it. They reflected on their own experiences, recognizing universal truths within the pianist's story. One person spoke about grief and the way it had changed their life. Another mentioned moments of fear they had never shared with anyone. The gentle composition had created a safe space for these reflections, demonstrating that art could facilitate emotional honesty in ways that conversation sometimes could not. It had become more than a performance. It had become a catalyst for shared introspection. Back in the hall, the pianist finally sat alone at the piano, running fingers lightly over the keys without playing full notes. There was a satisfaction in the silence, a contentment in knowing that the music had conveyed what words alone could not. They thought of the journey that had brought them here, the private hours of practice, the struggles behind the composition, and the courage to share both the music and the story. Every note had been intentional, every phrase a reflection of lived experience. And now the impact of that effort could be observed in the expressions of those who had listened with open hearts. Some audience members returned to thank the pianist once more, this time with longer conversations. They spoke of gratitude for the emotional honesty, for the beauty of the music, and for the way the story had resonated personally. One older listener mentioned that they had lost someone they loved years ago, and that the composition had given them a chance to feel both grief and hope simultaneously. Another described feeling a new understanding of resilience, of the human capacity to endure and transform difficult experiences into something meaningful. The pianist listened, quietly absorbing these responses, humbled by the connection formed through art. As the night deepened, the hall emptied completely. The pianist remained for a few moments, absorbing the lingering energy and reflecting on the events. The gentle composition had done more than entertain. It had reached deep into hearts and minds, leaving an impression that would last. They thought of the people who had left, carrying fragments of the story with them, and felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. Music had bridged distance, had communicated what words could not, and had created a shared understanding of emotion and experience. Later, walking home under the soft glow of streetlights, the pianist reflected on the impact of the evening. They realized that vulnerability, though difficult, had the power to connect people in profound ways. By sharing personal truth through music, they had touched lives in ways that would ripple far beyond that single night. Each interaction, each whispered comment, and each reflective gaze from the audience reinforced the importance of honesty, courage, and the quiet power of creative expression. At home, the piano sat waiting, silent but full of potential. The pianist sat before it, letting fingers hover above the keys, thinking of future compositions. The story they had shared tonight was just one chapter, but it had opened the door to a deeper connection with themselves and others. Music would continue to serve as a voice for emotion, a companion through difficult times, and a bridge between personal experience and shared understanding. The gentle composition was no longer just a piece of music. It was a testament to resilience, empathy, and the transformative power of honesty. In the following days, people continued to talk about the performance and the story behind it. Friends mentioned it in conversation, neighbors reflected on the experience, and even strangers who had attended found themselves sharing the tale with others. The pianist's courage and authenticity became a quiet inspiration, a reminder that true expression could create lasting connections. The gentle piano composition lived on, both in memory and in the hearts of those who had been present, a symbol of the power of music to convey truth, evoke emotion, and foster empathy. The pianist returned to composing, inspired by the experience and the responses they had received. They knew that music could continue to tell stories that words could not, that emotions could be expressed through melody, harmony, and silence. Each new composition became an opportunity to explore feelings, to share experiences, and to connect with others in meaningful ways. The memory of that night, the audience's reactions, and the story behind the gentle composition remained a guiding light, shaping every note played and every melody created. In the end, the gentle piano composition and the story behind it left a lasting legacy. It reminded everyone who experienced it that music was more than sound, that honesty could create profound connections, and that courage to share personal truth could inspire others. The pianist, carrying the quiet satisfaction of a story shared and understood, continued on their path with renewed purpose, knowing that art had the power to touch hearts, bridge divides, and leave a lasting mark on the world. The story of that night, intertwined with music and emotion, would remain a part of everyone present, a gentle yet enduring reminder of the beauty, vulnerability, and strength of human experience.